Vedic astrology is an integral part of the Vedas. It's a limb of the Vedas. If we take the Vedas as an entire body, then Jyotish or Vedic astrology can't possibly be working well without the rest of the body. The whole conclusion of the Vedas is that we're actually here to realize our eternal relationship with divine, and that too in its most unique expression. That goes beyond even just the realization of a oneself. The Vedic scriptures and texts provide different clues or instructions or stories on how that happens. It's about achieving the ultimate happiness, a happiness that brings true bliss. That's the desirable objective that the Atma, the self in everybody, ultimately seeks. We can infer then that every limb of the Vedas is designed to work towards this objective. Jyotish or Vedic astrology, it can only be about this in the end. Even though Vedic astrology can help a person navigate through life on so many different levels, the science is about preserving this great integrity. A lot of the important messages in the Vedas in that way are very present in the books of Ved Vyasa, the Puranas and great texts like the Srimad Bhagavatam. For Vedic knowledge to survive, divine is said to descend in human form in various personalities. These personalities deliver this sacred knowledge to the population so that people don't have to stay trapped in endless cycles of birth, death, and suffering. Besides these kinds of Vedic texts, we have these ancient texts of Vedic astrology, and even though they've changed and been rewritten and probably been adapted and readapted and probably existing in some incomplete form right now, these transcripts have been passed down through the centuries. We learn that Parashara was a sage, and he gave us the most popular foundational astrology that Vedic astrologers practice today. But there's also other sages. For example, there's Jaimini, who wrote the Jaimini Sutras, and there's many others. Even today, in contemporary times, there are special individuals who are imbued with an understanding of the Vedas. They've understood the conclusion of the Vedas, they've realized the conclusion of the Vedas, and they've been inspired to deliver the message of the Vedas. The other insight we get from these Vedic texts is that being Vedic means to uphold the Dharma. There's a reason why the avatar or divine keeps coming down. He comes down to protect the Dharma. What is the Dharma for human beings? In these Vedic texts, there's a very high Dharma, and it all seems to be about having a genuine moral integrity. And by moral, I'm referring to the idea that there's a certain attitude to be adopted towards the Supreme Being or Supreme Divine. There's an acknowledgement that has to happen. And in order to have a more steady acknowledgement, then virtuous actions and a virtuous attitude is always recommended. Virtue is what really helps a person on the spiritual path. It's a principal theme in Vedic texts. In a broad definition, we could say it does involve doing good to others, not just other human beings, but all living beings. And it is about honoring divine. But words like morality and virtue and their definitions have been one-dimensionalized because the conditioned mind is always going to limit the definitions. It's not really a simple thing because there's diversity and there's a need for diversity. That's a part of creation. But words like morality and virtue are not just terms of a conditioned mind. They do have an absolute dimension to them, which would encompass the limitless creativity of divine. In Vedic texts, we do find recommended actions or attitudes that could foster or increase the virtue in ourselves. In that way, the Vedic texts are acting as an objective reference. If we only rely on our own subjective ideas, it's not always the fastest way to get from point A to point Z. When it comes to understanding the Vedic path or Vedic teachings, it's like anything. If a person wants to master the piano, then there are certain steps which would facilitate that much more effectively than others. There are some core steps in a process that can't be diluted. The Vedas are in essence a type of instruction manual. And an astrologer who wants to be Vedic will be exposed to and be aware of these matters as well.